I will introduce myself. I'll be talking. My name is Alika Zangieva. I'm originally from North Ossetia. I'm a PhD student here at the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton, and I will be talking about the North Caucasus and its diasporas. My research focuses on the North Caucasian communities in late Ottoman security structures. For the past 2 years, archival and ethnographic fieldwork with North Caucasian diaspora communities in Jordan and Turkey in particular. Today, I will discuss the North Caucasus as a transnational region and explore how its diasporas have shaped political, social, and cultural life far beyond the contemporary borders of the Caucasus, as we've been discussing. So if you bear with me as I just momentarily pull up my PowerPoint, and then we will begin. Okay. Can't see that. Okay. All right. So one of the things that I have been learning throughout my research on the North Caucasus and its diasporas is that as complicated as the region is, it is worthwhile to move beyond solely an inward-looking approach. So we know that the North Caucasian diaspora minorities are quite small in their respective host states. However, I found that their experience can and does tell us a lot about their respective contexts in the wider world. And so my aim here, but also hopefully for this organization, is not only to demarginalize North Caucasus studies, but to convey its potential of having something to offer to other fields of study and inquiry as well. So instead of kind of offering a comprehensive history of North Caucasian diasporas, they're vast, they're all over the world, stretching from New Jersey to Turkey to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, I could go on. I'm going to particularly focus on the Turkish and Jordanian cases to explore one recurring pattern of research that has come up in my research, and that is the ways that North Caucasian diaspora communities have navigated the tension between their frequent integration and incorporation into elite state structures, and their ability to kind of maintain and preserve a transnational, or I say our ability, communal solidarity as well. So I think it is important to start with the fact that there we go. The fact of North Caucasian diaspora was not always a given. It's the results of primarily 3 stages of Russian conquest, beginning with Ivan IV's marriage to a Kabardinian princess, moving into a more militarized form of annexation with the capture of Derbent at the Mosda fortification line, and then ultimately the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774, which strongly undermined Ottoman influence in the Muslim population, particularly of the northwestern Caucasus and Kabarda, as well as Crimea. The most frequent part of the story is typically associated with Imam Shamil. You guys can also mute perhaps somebody who has, yeah, Imam Shamil, who led the anti-Russian resistance movement until his surrender in 1859, upon which many northwestern tribes of the Caucasus continued their fight against Russian encroachment, resulting in approximately 1 million individuals from the North Caucasus, as well as many Tatars and other Muslim communities arriving to Ottoman territories between 1850 and World War I. And so Ottoman officials viewed these migrants and refugees primarily through the category of muhajirs, meaning someone seeking refuge in Muslim territory upon facing religious persecution. And as Vladimir Hamatriansky outlines in his book, it was this ideological core that characterized the Ottoman refugee regime. But even in the 1820s, prior to the mass influx of people, Ottoman military commanders increasingly viewed these communities as well suited to the Ottomans' very pragmatic challenges of manpower shortages and frontier security needs. So although the just read this. The 1857 immigration law, it exempted Muhajirs from taxation temporarily as well as regular military service, but there was a gradual militarization of the communities as Ottoman officials began to mobilize refugees through irregular military structures, and settlement policy increasingly became tied to frontier security, with North Caucasians serving as auxiliary forces, particularly in contested regions. And this kind of first came to the fore with the notorious Circassian Basha Bozuk, loosely translated as irregular or undisciplined troops. And these became a prevalent arm of state power amid the 1870s uprisings in the Balkans. And you can imagine that combined with the humanitarian crisis and this militarization of the refugees, the people in need of most assistance became also the most militarized and very much in clashing with the Russian Cossacks who came to the region in service to the Russian Empire. And this had a major consequences, not only of blurring the line between civilian and perpetrator, but also severely contributed to Ottoman collapse and Ottoman legitimacy in the Ottoman Balkans. So similar trends of irregular mobilization occurred in Eastern Anatolia and Levant, but resulted slightly differently. So there, North Caucasian refugees, as you can see, petitioned to form formal volunteer cavalries, including from among family members still residing in the North Caucasus, with hopes of gaining status, patronage, political language within the empire, and following the 1877-1878 Russo-Ottoman War and the loss of the European territories, the security logic of refugee settlement became much more explicit. So here you see a photo of Mehmet Fazıl Pasha. He is an ethnic Avar from the Dagestani village of Chokh and a former member of Abdul Hamid II's palace guards, with a group of Kurdish chieftains whom he has tasked to co-opt and suppress at his discretion. And this extended to other projects in the Ottoman frontiers, such as the Hejaz Railway, which was also protected and ensured in security by nations. So actually, what I found interesting when I was looking at all these militia, North Caucasian diaspora leaders, if you look at even just the most commonly referenced names, like Mehmet Fazıl Pasha, Ghazi Muhammad Pasha, the son of the anti-Russian resistance leader Imam Shamil, names like Deli Fuat Pasha, Musa Kundukhov, Mirza Wasif Pasha, across various ethnic conglomerates of the North Caucasus, they also very much come up in the growing foundations of the diaspora intellectuals and political activists, including those who really began to pioneer the umbrella of Circassianness or Cherkessia in the Ottoman context. And this brings me to the more critical point of diaspora activism and politicization versus geopolitical realities that they were in. And so this tension between diaspora political aspirations and of various kinds and Ottoman strategic interests became especially prevalent during the First World War, when the seeming potential for North Caucasian federative autonomy coincided with this renewed Ottoman attempt of anti-Russian pan-Islamic uprising in the North Caucasus, as well as the recruitment of diaspora networks abroad for intelligence and reconnaissance missions. So, even though Ottoman security bodies often appear to be materially or even sometimes financially supporting North Caucasian independence movements, this was always only up to state interested capacity. And this is not to obviously mention a disagreement among diaspora leaders themselves on what North Caucasian or even Circassian activism looks like. And here you can see the archive is just populated with this mention of various North Caucasian communities in terms of their employment, specifically in deployment in this particularly obsessed focus on the pan-Islamic uprising, which failed both in 1877 and in World War I for various reasons we can also discuss in the Q&A. So just briefly, in the Turkish War for Independence, it very much narrowed a lot of these political possibilities. And the decades to follow resulted in two major ideologies, diaspora ideologies. One was the United Caucasianism, kind of a right-wing anti-Soviet ideology, and the more Soviet-tolerant returnism ideology. And then another left-leaning ideology was diasporism, which went beyond the returnists and demanded kind of a full socialist revolution inside of Turkey. And many of these individuals ended up jailed upon the 1880 in Turkey. And then an Islamic dimension, which entered into the diaspora in Turkey throughout the 1990s with the Russia-Chechen wars, which also began to emphasize micro-national identity divisions between Abkhazians, Chechens, Avars, Dugors, and Degays, which was not so much the case before, when it was prominently a Circassian umbrella that held everyone together. And perhaps more consequentially, and what I encountered in my ethnographic fieldwork was this continuous question that I think we're feeling also today of what is our relationship to the Russian Federation when access to the homeland often requires knowledge, study of the Russian language as opposed to the native language. I mean, how does that make sense to somebody who's grown up their whole life learning about the history of their supposed bloodline? So this really hit me in the face. These are some of the photos here of the commemorations of the Circassian genocide by the Kafkas Vakfı, the Caucasus Trust, as well as other diaspora associations that are part of commemorating this day every May in Turkey and around the world through speeches, performances, demonstrations, academic events. What I found interesting as I was filming these and I was putting them on my Instagram story was the amount of very, very upset reactions I got to North Caucasian friends, acquaintances, family members in the North Caucasus itself, who were just flabbergasted that people were demonstrating in any capacity against Russia. Especially considering the month of May, which, in the diaspora has a significance of the genocide and its commemoration, but in the North Caucasus itself is full of attempts by the Federation to promote especially a non-Russian focused campaign celebrating the World War II effort, and with posters and billboards and individual family members, like you see on the bottom left here, a billboard, typical billboard in Vladikavkaz that you might have. And so just to translate for you, people don't speak Russian, this is just one message that I got, shame on them. Are they really demonstrating against Russia? And after all that, they consider themselves Caucasians. And so that was quite emotional for me and something that continues to be unresolved as I think and study about the region. So and what became even more interesting is to compare this with the Jordan case, where the genocide commemoration events tended to be just as critical, actually, perhaps even more, of the Ottoman Empire as they were about with the Russian Empire and the Russian Federation. And their Circassians are, frequently pictured with Queen Rania. They're featured on Vogue magazine. They have a very public display of their background on social media. Here you have someone wearing a T-shirt at the Jordan Caucasus Wrestling Championship, wearing a T-shirt with Chechnya written on it in Cyrillic, somebody up farther wearing a traditional papacha hat. And so I was, thinking, like, why did Jordan turn out differently? There's so many different diaspora experiences happening at the same time. There's so much connection, nevertheless, especially actually between Turkey and Jordan. And so I began to think about how the Hashemites monarchy incorporated Circassians, particularly the Circassian volunteer cavalry of Mirza Wasfi Pasha, from the very beginning of Transjordan. And everybody knows, a lot of people know this famous photo of King Abdullah I wearing the Circassian costume upon being greeted by this volunteer cavalry, which pledged their support to his leadership. In the Ottoman period, as Nora Barakat has written about as well, North Caucasian refugees had already operated as these kinds of frontiersmen for Ottoman consolidation of land, and their function as these intermediary, as I exemplified with Mehmet Fazıl Pasha, between the state and Bedouin or Kurdish or Arab tribes really strengthened leadership in those areas. And at the moment that this actually became quite significant for the question of diaspora politics in the contemporary period in Jordan was with the Palestinian question, when it transformed Jordanian politics. And when the monarchy specifically began to seek out and cultivate non-Palestinian, nevertheless Muslim constituencies that were not affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And what actually surprised me in my interviews is that although people usually evoke the Circassians of Jordan in reference to the famous Circassian Royal National Guard, which continues to exist today, the actual more consequential role of the diaspora and what they were talking about the most was an organization called the Jordanian Special Forces, Al-Quwwat al-Khassa al-Malikiya, created in 1963 and composed primarily of Chechen and Circassian diaspora members. So while for the Hashemite monarchy, the role of the North Caucasian diaspora members in their head, and if you talk to government officials, this always comes up, it's a very anti-Palestinian liberation organization, anti-Muslim Brotherhood directed state project. Whereas when I speak with the retired members, Circassian members, such as Hayreddin al-Haqquz and Jordan of the Jordan Special Operation Forces, or Ahmed Allah ad-Din's son as well, who's pictured here with King Hussein, they view this as a way to give back to the diaspora, and continually frequented stories which I have not necessarily been able to find any proof of, but that continue to emerge in my fieldwork, such as, for example, when Syrian Circassians contacted Ahmed al-Din when fearing repression under Hafiz al-Assad, upon which he allegedly helped establish a covert escape route. Regardless of whether that was proven or not, this story reached the Chechens in Grozny, where they actually opened an Ulitsa Ahmed Arslan Alauddin, the street named after Ahmed Arslan Alauddin, which kind of brings me to my larger point that I'm trying to make, which is that the North Caucasian diaspora has historically been utilized, historically emerged in the archive as a kind of inherent part of state institutions and structures, but that has also been in service to collective survival as a path alongside traditional resistance structures that you might find in other minority contexts. And some further actually examples of this began to emerge during my fieldwork with stories of the Iraq War, when the Jordanian Circassian Association helped transfer the Circassians from many of the Chechens from Iraq to Jordan. Another case was the Abkhazian War, in which hundreds of volunteers from Jordan and Turkey who have never been to the North Caucasus, let alone left their own countries, went, and many of them died in service for Birleşik Kafkasya, United Caucasianism. And it really, these episodes to me, and of course, the Turkish air bridge operation, the most recent case in which the Circassians of Turkey airlifted or utilized Turkish government structures to airlift the Circassians from Syria and provided homes for them in Circassian diaspora villages throughout Turkey. And so these episodes really illustrate how transnational diaspora solidarity has often operated through rather than despite competing state loyalties. And it's actually here where I think North Caucasus studies can perhaps have something to offer to the larger fields of minority studies, moving away beyond primordialism, pan-Islamism, or traditional anti-colonial paradigms of analysis. So thank you very much for listening. I'd love to speak about this more.